Hi everyone, I'm David. Welcome again in Melbourne Flight Training YouTube channel. Today we're going to start talking about instrument flying. And the first lesson that we're going to cover today is holding procedures. Holding procedures is one of the tasks that we train and practice on instrument training that a lot of people are afraid of. But realistically, there's not a reason to be afraid of. Holding patterns is something that you will rarely do in real life IFR flying, but we have to be ready for this. Certain situations where you will do a hold is, for example, bad weather, there's been an emergency on the airport and the runway's closed, or in bigger airplanes, if they have an emergency and they need to burn some fuel or dump some fuel before coming back to land because of the airplane's limitations. As you see, if everything is well organized as it usually is in our ATC system, there will barely be any need for holding. So today we're gonna go through what is a hold, how to enter a hold, the different type of entries, limitations associated with holds, and finally we're going to talk about the standards in the instrument ACS for this maneuver. Holding procedures are used by ATC to keep aircraft within a specific confined area in the National Airspace System. They do it to delay the airplane while still keeping them in a specific point. So you can imagine a hold as a racetrack where you're going to have a couple different segments. The first one that you're going to have, and the most important one, is the holding fix, which is this imaginary point that you can find either in a GPS fix, in a VOR, NDB, a localizer, or certain distance or DME from a VOR or any nav aid. After you have this holding fix, we're going to have an inbound leg, which is basically when we're going to be flying towards the fix, our outbound leg where we are going to be flying parallel to the holding fix away, and then you're going to have your outbound end and your holding fix end, which is basically when we are going to be doing those turns. This procedure is something that, as I mentioned earlier, you're not going to use it as much, but it's always important to be ready for them because ATC can issue you holding instructions at any given time. And usually these holding instructions will be published holds that you're going to see it in your IFR low and route chart or in an instrument approach procedure, but it can also be unpublished if ATC needs you to stay at a specific spot for a certain amount of time. So holding clearance usually looks like the ATC is going to tell you to hold in the direction from that holding fix, which means hold north, south, east, west. The holding fix, then they're going to mention if you're holding from a radial, a course, or a bearing from this holding fix. They're going to mention you which side are you going to do our holds, if it's to the right, which is the standard, or to the left, which is the non-standard. Something really important. If ATC doesn't tell you the right or left turns, you have to assume that's a standard hold. So it means right turns. The timing of the hold or the distance, which could be 1 minute for DME, etc., etc., etc. And finally, any expected further clearance time, which means that if by that time you haven't heard anything, you perhaps should ask, or you can realize that you're in lost communications, and then you will take your flight plan from there. Now, there are different ways to join a holding fix, and it all depends on where you're coming or your direction in relationship to the holding fix. How we do that, we have 3 standard entries for a holding procedure. The first one is a direct entry where you're basically gonna get to the fix and start your hold. Then we're gonna have a teardrop entry. In this teardrop entry, you are going to fly you're gonna get to the holding fix, and then we like to use 2 acronyms. The first one is LARS, which is if it is left turns, you're gonna add 30 degrees from what would be your outbound heading, and if it's a right turn, you would subtract 30 degrees from your outbound heading. So for example, you're having a hold that's right turns and your outbound course heading is going to be heading 270, you will fly heading of 240 for 1 minute. And then this is where our second acronym will come into place, which is POTS. If it's parallel, you turn opposite, and if it's teardrop, you turn same. What does this mean? We've been flying this heading of 240 for 1 minute. So now we gotta turn back to our holding fix. So in this case, because we have a right hold, then we're gonna make a right turn and join the holding pattern. And finally, we have the parallel. Well, how we perform a parallel entry? We will go to the fix, we will fly the outbound heading for 1 minute, and then, as I said previously, parallel opposite. So if it's a right turn leg, we're going to make a left turn and join the holding fix and join the holding pattern. There's certain limitations when doing holds. The first one is the airspeed, and the second one is the timing. So if we are holding from the minimum holding altitude up to 6,000 feet, our maximum airspeed is 200 knots of indicated airspeed. And if you're flying faster than this, you need to start slowing down 3 minutes before reaching the holding fix. From 6,001 feet to 14,000 feet MSL, our maximum holding airspeed is 230 knots. And finally, above 14,001 feet, we're going to be holding at 265 knots of indicated airspeed. When talking about the timing, when we are holding from the minimum holding altitude up to 14,000 feet, we will hold for 1 minute legs. That's a standard leg. And if we are holding 14,001 feet and up, is going to be for 1 minute at house. Now, in a perfect world, it sounds really simple, right? We're flying, heading 090, we're 1 minute. We reach the fix, we make a 180-degree turn, we fly heading 270 for 1 minute, 180-degree turn. It sounds really easy, right? Well, when we're flying, it's not as simple as that. There's something that's really important, and that wind always plays a factor into our hold. So let's say that we're holding, and while we're flying into the holding fix or in our inbound leg, we have our crosswind from the right that it's also partly a headwind. So quarterling, headwind, and crosswind. So what does this mean? That the wind is stopping us from reaching to a holding fix, and it's also drifting us apart. So what do we need to do to take everything into account? The whole objective of a holding procedure is that the inbound leg is 1 minute and you're completely centered. You're flying straight to the holding fix. So that means that everything that you do to correct this or to fix this, it's being done on the outbound leg. So let's say that, for example, we are flying to the fix and we have a 5-degree wind correction angle, and instead of taking us 1 minute, it's taking us 1 minute and 20 seconds. So what we're going to do is that once we get to the outbound, we are going to correct that wind correction angle times 3, which means that we were flying in the inbound 5 degrees towards the wind, and the outbound we're going to fly 15 degrees towards the outbound, and we're going to either add or subtract the time that it took us in the inbound. So in this case, if it took us 1 minute and 20 seconds to get to our holding fix on the inbound leg, we're going to fly 40 seconds on the outbound leg to correct for this. And as you see, wind can change either direction, speed at any given time. So doing a hold is a matter of constantly correcting and making sure that you're doing everything that you need so you keep that inbound leg always at 1 minute and you're always centered. Why is it really important to be centered? Because a hold will have a protected side and a non-protected side. The protected side is basically the area where you're holding, and everything else will be unprotected. So what is the protected side protecting you from? It can be either protecting you from obstacles such as mountains, antennas, buildings, etc., or it can be protecting you from other traffic. ATC is giving you that portion of the airspace to make sure that you're completely safe. That's why wind correction and turning to the right side every single time is really, really, really important. Now, to finish it off, we will be talking about what are the standards for the ACS for this maneuver. The first thing that the ACS mentions is identifying and flying the correct entry to stay in the protected area, altitude of plus or minus 100 feet, airspeed plus or minus 10 knots, no more than 10 degrees of heading, and no more than 3/4 scale deflection of your CDI while you're doing the hold. If you're performing all of this, you should have no trouble in passing your lesson, your state check, or your check ride, and of course, being safe in the National Airspace System. Thank you for joining me in this lesson. Find your scanners for IFR in the Fallon Pilot Shop. You can find it if you come to our facilities on fallonpilotshop.com. Thank you.